with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, there's a tremendous amount of things going on and a lot of things to talk about today. We're going to have just an incredible show. And you've dug up some really interesting sound bites. I mean, you're a pro at that. I always can't wait to see what you come up with next. But some really great sound bites this week. President Biden, going door to door. And
I think he's going to go door to door. He's going to do the inoculations
door to door with yeah. I mean, you talk about people's privacy and hey, look. I got the vaccine. I think people should get the vaccine. I got it. But my wife doesn't want to get it. And I know a lot of people who don't want to get it because, look, they're scared. That they don't like the idea of a vaccine that's been rushed through. And I think, a lot of people, just who are not going to get it, it's just philosophically they're against it. So what are you going to do?
By the way,
so what are you going to do about that?
It's their right.
It's their right.
To
it's their
say
body.
No.
Isn't it, President Biden will tell you that one's body is their own responsibility and you get control over your body. Should not you have control over deciding whether you have a vaccine in your body?
God, I wonder what Jeff Epstein would have said about this. Control over your own body. I mean, it's really a shame that he's not here to discuss it with us. Yeah, anyway, go ahead.
Well, I guess that's a whole nother show.
Another show.
But anyway, a lot to talk about. And also President Biden talking about comparing himself with President Reagan. I mean, that was also...
That's a good one.
Morning in America. Well, he says, it's kind of late morning or early afternoon, in Washington, and the sun is shining, and he's comparing himself to Ronald Reagan and the economy that Reagan had brought in after, of course, the Carter economy, which was a completely different story.
How ironic.
Yeah. Well, anyway, a lot to talk about today, Rich. I mean, we're going to have an incredible show. But first, let's talk about what's happening right now with President Trump suing Facebook and Twitter. I mean, thank God he's doing that because, it's going to be a tough battle. Will he win or not? It's probably stacked against him. But bringing this out into the public, I think, is a really great thing. And in fact, so many progressives and Democrats are also very upset with the tech giants. And a lot of talk, and maybe one of the things where there is some bipartisanship is breaking up the tech companies. And wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? I think that you would agree that these companies have way too much power.
Oh, well, when Zuckerberg could give $300 million to the Democratic Party to make sure they win in certain states, that they can put the boxes out, the ballot boxes, and not official, by the way. They were put out by Bobby and Jimmy and half the Lawrence Welk band, since they're not together anymore. Those guys needed a job. So they went ahead and did that. And, yeah, it concerns me. It worries me a lot. I think this is the right thing to do, I do believe.
Well, let's bring on our first guest, Will Rinehart, who's a senior research fellow at the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. Will, welcome to Made in America.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So, I mean, look, this is a really great thing. So let's just talk about, the whole lawsuit itself, going after Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg and, they've just got way too much power. They're very political, incredibly political. They're using their platforms to censor. thoughts and points of view that, that maybe, they don't support, but that's okay. Don't support it. But, their organizations, their companies now are so much bigger than they are and so much bigger than their small minds are. And, but they're using it in a way that it should not be used as a public utility. It's become that, a public utility. And they're using it for their own narrow political interests. And President Trump is going to take them to court for this. So tell us what's going on here.
Yeah, this is an interesting case. It's an unusual case because Trump is basically claiming that he was acting as a private citizen on January 7th when he was banned by Facebook and Twitter, and that that the platforms themselves were effectively government entities, what the legal profession calls state actors, and because of that, these platforms ended up violating First Amendment principles because they were restricting the speech of a citizen. So to me, this is a really, really interesting case because Trump is claiming that he was a private citizen and acting as a private citizen when his profile was taken down, which he was the president clearly. And then he's also saying that these platforms basically were government appendages. They were state actors because they shared information from the CDC. So this case, I think, is an interesting one. I don't see this one going pretty far. I think there's other things that are happening, obviously, and I know we want to talk about those as well, that are happening that probably could be a little bit more impactful. There's some really interesting legislation, but I think this case in particular is a really, really, really tough case because basically President Trump is trying to make First Amendment claims when I don't really think that I don't really think he has very strong First Amendment claims anyway. And there's a whole bunch of court precedent, especially by Justice Kavanaugh in particular, that really, really suggests that the court itself is really going to take a really hard eye on those instances when platforms are state actors, as they're called. So it's not going to be that often that the government decides, yes, that this private entity really is a government appendage or a government entity itself, or is acting like a government entity. And so the law just doesn't really give him very much wiggle room to even kind of put this case, in front of courts. And I have a feeling that courts will probably strike it down pretty quickly.
Well, let me ask you this. One of the reasons that all of the lawsuits and the complaints in the courts as it related to the election did not go through because many of the judges said there was no standing. That was part of the conversation that they had. There were other things that they said, of course, but standing was one of them. And the discussion is out there this week that President Trump waited until DeSantis and Florida passed the bill that gave him the ability as a citizen of Florida to go after the big tech oligarchs because now he would have standing and he could do it through the auspices of the bill that was passed in Florida. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so from my read of the Florida bill, the social media Florida bill, last week that was put on hold as well. So the Florida Supreme Court actually put that case on hold as well. For very similar claims that having speech restrictions of these platforms, I'm not going to deny these platforms definitely have a lot of power, right? They determine what we're talking about. They are they're becoming this public square, even though I think that's a really complicated term itself. And so I think that we need to think hard and clearly about how we create new sources of competition and how we empower individuals to push back against them. But at the same time, I'm very, very concerned about using First Amendment. And we saw, especially with the social media bill over in Florida, that got shot down for First Amendment claims because it's trying to tell these platforms what they can and cannot have on their websites, which, again, it's problematic that they are banning content. They're banning conservative content. But at the same time, it just worries me that we're really going down this route of the First Amendment to try to enforce that sort of output.
Well, also, I think when you pull back and you look from 30,000 feet on the scenario, and the interesting point to me is that these oligarchs, these sites, which claim that they use algorithms written by and developed by somebody who probably wants to be anti-conservative anyway. So the algorithms work against the conservative, because they sure as heck don't work against the liberals. That's for sure. But when they start taking, for example, the problem with the virus, when the president wanted to get the word out and discuss what was going on with the virus, anybody who disagreed with the mainstream agenda that this is not from China, you can't talk about China, it's wrong to talk about China, it's xenophobic to talk about China, you can't do that, and you're thrown off. They can't do that. Or when they're talking about hydrochloroquine, they're saying, well, you can't do that because, this is dangerous and you're going to have people take a dangerous drug, which we all knew was a lie. It was not a dangerous drug. It's a 55-year history with the drug. They did that, and I wonder how many people died as a result of them doing that. Or when Biden's son, Hunter Biden's laptop was out there, and the New York Post, which we'd all agree, one of the largest and oldest newspapers in the country, has a front page story, well documented, that can't get played. So they block it before the election. Then the question becomes, all right, is it an infringement on the First Amendment right, or is it actually censoring? And I think that's going to be the crux of it. So we're going to come up on a wall for a break in just a second or two, and then Neil, I'd like to follow up on this when we come back after the break.
Well, that's what we're going to do. Hey, Will, hold that thought for a second, because a very, very important question from Dr. Rothman, and also, what can be done about these tech companies? I want to get to that. I mean, if this is a long shot, but what can be done to break them up, to lessen their influence, because their influence is not good for America. We're talking to Will Rinehart, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. Stay with us. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are together with Will Rinehart, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. So, Will, what do you think about what Rich just said?
Yeah, no, there's a lot there, right? There is a lot that is that I think is very concerning about these platforms. I mean, as we've seen, almost a complete 180, especially by Facebook, on the question of, the lab leak hypothesis. So that has clearly shifted pretty dramatically. And it's very clear that obviously websites like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube do have, I think, a very strong ability to determine what kind of speech goes online. To me, the way to deal with that, I guess I'm just hesitant to use the First Amendment and to use laws in order to enforce a better kind of speech that exists out there, right? I would much rather see people push back, as they did in the example of the New York Post. The New York Post article that was taken down by Facebook. You had this explosion of conversation over the act of the New York Post trying to take down that article. So, and it faced a lot of pressure, internal pressure and external pressure. To basically reform themselves, and the story itself had almost a wildfire effect. So as much,
but Will, they censor and they have control over the public square, as you said. They're like public utilities. I mean, they're like Ma Bell, they're like AT&T back in the day when they monopolized telephone communication, right? And it wasn't like AT&T could say, well, that's a conservative speaking on this telephone line. I'm going to shut that telephone line down because I don't like conservative thought. But we're going to let all these other people talk, and they can freely talk and say whatever they want on the telephone line. But when we disagree with a political thought, then we're just going to shut those lines down. Of course, they couldn't do that, but that's what's happening right now with the tech companies, right? They're just shutting down the lines. The communication lines of people that that they may disagree with the political thought. So can these private companies? And I guess the answer is yes. Can private companies censor? And they're not beholden to the First Amendment. They're not beholden to free speech. To them, since they're a private organization, a private entity, they can do or say and close down anybody they want, and the government basically they can't do anything about it.
I mean, for better or worse, yes, that is the case. That because they're private entities, they don't have the ability to. That the government doesn't really have the ability to determine what goes on these platforms. You're exactly.
So then let's get to the next step. What can be done? Because they did break up Ma Bell. They did break it up very effectively. You got all the baby bells, but there isn't that monopoly anymore. So why don't we break these guys up? Isn't this way past time to start breaking these guys up? And isn't there bipartisan support to breaking these guys up?
Yeah, so there's a lot that's going on in Congress right now, and I would always take a very I think that we need to take a very nuanced approach when we think about even the breakup, say, of AT&T, because effectively in 1996 there was a new Telecommunications Act that kind of created a new system that allowed for competition to flourish. Now, that system itself is highly controversial in its own right, but I think that what's happening in Congress is trying to figure out what that system looks like, which generally was called unbundling, what that might look like for Facebook and for Twitter. And the idea really has come from this, and that has sprung from this, is this idea of interoperability. So you have the ability to take away your data, or you have the ability to port your data, because that's like kind of the core asset, obviously, of these companies. And so you should be able to take, as a citizen, say, hey, I'm able to, be able to take my information away from here and give and connect to a website that I would like to connect to, while at the same time being able to access my friends and information that, say, exists over on Facebook. That's a very live issue right now. And personally, I'd much rather see that sort of path being taken instead of the First Amendment path, because I think it solves a whole bunch of other related problems. Now, again, I have some tensions and issues with how you actually design that in law, and I think we need to take a much more critical look at it. But I think that there are better ways to do the kind of the conversational change, the free speech change that I think a lot of people want, without necessarily going through it with the First Amendment. I think this interoperability is an interesting question. Portability is an interesting question. And then, first and foremost, there's a whole bunch of people who are not part of these online platforms, who are going to Substack and going to newsletters, and who are using other methods to get their information and their viewpoints and their research out there without going towards the big platforms. So those are the two things I would hope happen. You have this kind of empowerment of new voices, but also this consideration potentially of some of these other sorts of laws. They need to be written correctly, and I think there probably are some concerns in writing them, but those are the two directions I'd much rather see, rather than bringing a First Amendment claim against them.
So, Dr. Rich, you're going to get the last word on this.
All right, here's a question, a quickie. You got 15 seconds, so I'm sure you can do great in that.
Yeah.
Section 230, liability. What happens if we take away their insurance from liability? What happens with that? Does that change the landscape?
Lost you there for a second.
The liability, Section 230, that protects these guys, the oligarchs, from doing what they want to do, or protecting them from things that are on the site. If the protection from any liability is removed, or gives them the opportunity to be sued, does that change what happens on their website, on their platforms, rather?
I think it does change pretty dramatically what happens on their websites, and they probably will start to have to go after, or they'll be subject to far more lawsuits. I wonder if that's going to result in a better speech platform for those on the right. And I have a hesitancy to think that, if this becomes a much more political issue, they're just going to get rid of all political speech, which is something that Twitter, in fact, tried to do with political advertising. So I worry about changing around Section 230. I'm very open to having that conversation about what it should look like and what Congress should redo with Section 230. But getting rid of it completely, I wonder, maybe put carve-outs into it. I think that's probably a better way to think through things instead of just getting rid of it completely.
Hey, Will, great thoughts. We really appreciate being on the show. You've been a wonderful guest.
Yeah,
Will Rinehart, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. Thanks for being on the show, Will.
Yeah, cheers.
Coming up, we have Christine McDaniel, Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center. Stay with us.
Made in America.
sharply higher at the open. Stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neil Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, from the outsized power of big tech and, the censorship that they've been doing and the information that they collect on us. We've talked about that before. The databases, everything in all our communications, and all things that's showing up, on your computer or your phones. It's not random. It's like they're tracking you, and you wonder, well, why are they showing me that product? Or why does this this story just all of a sudden show up on my phone? It's not random.
Well, that's a very concerning thought, and that is the data. And we're learning over the last few months, and particularly this week, that bad guys over in other countries, and in this case, in many cases, Russia right now, that we know about, maybe North Korea, Iran, and others, are accessing in ransomware usability databases of major corporations. It could be major banks. It could be, the pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline. But as all this is happening, data is being collected. And we don't know where that data is going. We don't know how it's going to be used. But we do know that we're being held kidnapped in ransom for, this week alone was $70 million demand to release the information. And that's very worrisome. And I think that's something that we need to take very, very seriously going forward. This is not fun. You can't say, well, here, Putin, here's 16 things that you can't do. Oh, okay. So that's 16 different companies and areas of our economy that you can't touch. But God knows what you can go after on the rest. That's okay. We'll look the other way. I think we got to take it a lot more seriously than that. So I'm very excited for this next guest.
Well, very good.
You like that one?
Very good segue.
That was a segue. That was a serpentine segue.
Introduction to Christine McDaniel, Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Christine, welcome to Made in America.
Thank you so much. So good to be here.
So a lot to talk about in the economic world, and let's start with the global minimum corporate tax. And President Biden was recently in Europe, and he got all the European allies together, and they talked about this minimum tax, this minimum global corporate tax of 15%. And it seemed like there was a lot of buy-in over there. Now, from my perspective, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a small business owner. In small business, I have close to 500 employees, but the U.S. government considers me as a small business. And I got to tell you, I pay a lot of taxes, and I don't have the benefit of what these multinationals have, who are able to hire lots of very highly paid tax accountants and specialists, and they're doing hundreds of billions of dollars of business, and they don't pay any taxes, and that just seems wrong to me. On the other side, I understand that giving money from the most productive part of our society and economy, our businesses, and turning it over to a bunch of government bureaucrats, the most unproductive part of our economy, is just fundamentally wrong as well. So I'm kind of conflicted. Why should they not be paying any taxes? Because they've got armies of accountants to be able to scam and play the game and game the system. And I have to pay all the taxes. They don't. But at the same time, I'm sympathetic to giving more money to government bureaucrats is just wrong. So help me figure this out.
Yeah, that's a really good way of summing up some of the initial thoughts people have on this. But, this has been a long-going concern for many, many, many years. And the OECD has been convening meetings with, all of its members for at least the last decade, and maybe more, but things have really gotten heated up lately. And now this past the last few days, the proposal is really gaining steam, with a group of about 130 nations reaching really a groundbreaking agreement. I guess the official word is endorsement. So there's still more work to be done. But Treasury has declared that the race to the bottom must end, full stop, and that is the federal government's answer in unambiguous terms. But frankly, that has been, the U.S. position for a long time. But in many ways, I think it's other countries moving forward on digital taxes. That's really pushed this to come to a head. So this agreement would create a minimum tax on profits that companies earn by selling revenues, mainly advertising, but that don't have a physical presence in a country. So it doesn't really single out big U.S. tech giants, but it applies to the largest, quote unquote, largest and most profitable multinationals. So yes, that means Google and Apple, they get profits from their app store. Facebook, Google also gets profits from their app store, profits from advertising. Amazon profits from e-commerce, of course. And so, in the digital economy, anyone, anywhere can be a customer. So if you're buying from Amazon in France and you're not buying from a French retailer, then Amazon makes a profit. And they don't pay any taxes in France. They don't pay real estate taxes, property taxes. No money stays in France, right? So, the deal does sort of throw big tech under the bus, but it would also supersede any local digital taxes. And like I said, that these companies are really starting to battle these new digital tax plans that are coming out of France, Spain, the UK, Italy. The U.S. has threatened sanctions in response to those countries. And, Treasury is sitting there saying, well, look, we know that this is a problem. And if we don't do anything about it together, we are going to have a global trade war on our hands, that puts the last few years, in a very small bucket. So I think there was a large recognition that patience was running out, and if the countries didn't get together and figure out a plan forward, then these other countries were going to take steps on their own.
So how does this really help citizens of the United States? I mean, when I'm listening to this, one of the things that really makes sense in a free market is competition. And this kind of eliminates a lot of competition. I mean, if I was Ireland, for example, and other country like Ireland that had a very low tax rate and did very, very well with the corporations moving into Ireland, I would be very annoyed and be very upset with this. So when we come back after the break, I'd like to have your comment on how does this really help Americans, and at the same time, what is the real reason why these other 100 and some odd countries might want to or probably wouldn't go along with this?
So, Christine, hold that thought for a second. We're with Christine McDaniel from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. We're going to be right back.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we're together with Christine McDaniel, Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center. So, Christine, so what happens, with these tax havens, and as Rich just said, and at the other side is what's in it for America? What's in it for the American citizen? Are we going to benefit from this somehow? Explain this for us.
Well, in some ways, this is about fairness, right? So you and I pay taxes based on where we live, but large globe-trotting multinationals can locate their legal presence of profits where they want to. And then especially, digital tech giants can, it's very easy for them to put their legal presence in a low tax jurisdiction. They don't have, it's not like they're moving big factories, a lot of physical capital around. So they move them to Luxembourg or Cayman Islands or, other places that have been using near zero tax rates to lure companies, right, and lure their workers and that investment. So the idea of a 15% minimum tax would just discourage companies from moving that offshore. Now, big U.S. Advanced economies probably stand to gain the most because big U.S. companies offshore won't offshore if it won't save them as much in taxes, right? So the hope is we'll keep more business in the United States. So we'll be able to collect more corporate taxes, even though other countries will also be able to get some of those benefits. Before, nobody was getting them, right? But now we're saying, okay, we're all going to get them and we're all going to share them, right? So countries around the world are trying to build infrastructure and social services and build bridges and increase human capital and education. Raising more revenue from corporations is one way to do that.
So talk about infrastructure for a second. We have this infrastructure bill, which is a real infrastructure bill. And then we have this other, Democrat-only thing that they're talking about, which is anything and everything except infrastructure. They're calling it infrastructure.
Well, they redefine infrastructure.
Yeah, it's basically like the progressive agenda.
No,
now.
I think the word's evolved. Infrastructure has evolved.
So anyway, Mitch McConnell came out pretty strongly, saying that this bipartisan thing is a bunch of baloney, that they were hoodwinked, and that they're linking this to this other bigger $6 trillion package of anything but infrastructure, and using this bipartisanship just to show that that they're being fair about it as they pass on $6 trillion. Can you imagine $6 trillion? I just can't imagine that, Rich.
Well, it's like the magician. Look at my left hand, look at my left hand, and on the right hand, it's in your pocket. So that's the way it goes.
I don't know what's going on with all that. So the infrastructure, the one that passed, or not didn't pass, but the one that got this bipartisan support, is that still alive? Is that something that's going to get over the finish line? And or will it blow up because of this other $6 trillion, as Rich said, this David Copperfield sort of magic that's going on behind the scenes?
Well, it looks like, at least the first part, just the more bipartisan infrastructure part, does have a lot more momentum. And Biden's economic team, they did this 100-day review on supply chains. And a lot of things that came out of that report, were aimed to support and bolster, justify what was in that infrastructure bill, right? So, I read through that 100-day review, and a lot of the recommendations, made sense. But, other things did raise some red flags just in terms of the economics. There's, it always feels good to talk about, government infrastructure, government R&D, because, that's what governments are, relatively, pretty good at, schools, bridges, that hardcore infrastructure, although it is getting more and more privatized, and that's working out well in lots of parts of the country. But there is a fear that this infrastructure package is sort of a Trojan horse for just more protectionism. And I don't know if, I'm not saying that's a Republican or Democrat thing, but as an economist, I really do worry about that, because once you start talking about, the need for more resilient supply chains, right, that's just an invitation, and you see it already. You see more and more companies coming to Congress, coming to the White House, talking about how their industry, their company, is essential to national security, and why they need protection from imports, or why they need this special subsidy, or why they need, this special treatment. And so I'm really hoping that policymakers can see the difference between, between a real need for infrastructure versus, a veiled call for protectionism. There have been some things, that made a lot of sense, like improving supply chain transparency, knowing where the inputs are coming from. That is something that, if Customs and Border Protection, for instance, started to require of incoming shipments, then that could solve a lot of problems in terms of, knowing where, if for those customers that are interested if their T-shirt was made with forced labor or not, or for those people who want to know where their coffee's coming from, or where if a manufacturer wants to know if the steel that they're buying is really legitimate or if it's kind of getting shipped here through rerouted lines, illegally. So that type of infrastructure, really smart, really good idea. But
Christine, yeah, we're going to have to end it there. We unfortunately got a hard stop coming.
Okay, sorry.
Anyway, I really appreciate being on the show. You've been a great guest, Christine McDaniel-Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center. Christine, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I are going to have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, as I said at the beginning of the show, a lot going on this week, and we got a few minutes to cover a number of topics. We're going to get through this. You put together some really great sound bites, but the concept of the U.S. government knocking door to door and giving vaccine shots. I mean, what happens if you don't want a vaccine shot and someone's standing at your door? I mean, do they get to say you have to have it?
No, you have your dog bite them.
Or is that like round two? Now they come back with the local sheriff.
Then the FBI comes and then you're taken out.
And then they're holding you down, and you're going to get the shot whether you like it or not. I don't know. I mean, there's just something un-American about that.
Well, you know what? Let's play the soundbite from President Biden for a second when he actually announced how they're going to go door to door. I think it'd be interesting to hear it.
Now we need to go to community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood, and oftentimes door to door, literally knocking on doors to get help to the remaining people protected from the virus.
So, what I find it interesting is that we're starting to get into a forced mandatory environment, and that is worrisome for me. It seems so un-American. And that and Biden's been saying this, it's the right thing to do. It's do the patriotic thing, get the vaccination. Now, to be very clear, everyone I know got the vaccination. I know you got the vaccination, right? You got the vaccination?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And
I got it as soon as I could.
That's right. Me too. And so
I know a lot of people who haven't got the vaccination.
I know people who haven't gotten it, and I respect why they don't want to get it.
And it's philosophical for them.
Well, how about people who had the COVID and say, well, I don't need to get it, and yet many people are going to be forced. They're saying a lot of these larger corporations and schools will make you get the shot.
But remember when President Trump at the time, was really rushing through these vaccines, and then like the whole left was saying, I would never, ever get that vaccine.
Well, our vice president said that.
Vaccine. I'll never get that vaccine. It's the Trump vaccine. I will not get the vaccine.
She said, I won't do it. If Trump approved that, I won't do it. As if he was the one with the white coat on.
So the moment
he couldn't shut the coat, he'd never get in the lab.
He leaves, and it's now the new administration, and so they feel they're going to get the glory. So now all of a sudden, it's a great vaccination. This vaccination is not a Republican vaccination. It's not a Democrat vaccination. It's an American vaccination.
Right.
And the American people should be able to decide whether or not they get it.
Free speech, free ability to control your own body, and you don't have to tell your personal story for your body to a stranger. That's good. There was another soundbite out this week from Biden that he actually compared himself to Ronald Reagan, which is pretty scary, but I think people should hear that one too.
The last time the economy grew at this rate was in 1984, and Ronald Reagan was telling us it's morning in America. Well, it's getting close to afternoon here. The sun is coming out.
Well,
what did he really mean? Well, it's getting close to afternoon.
Well, because in his own way, he was trying to tell the time. And that's the best he could do at the moment without having it on the teleprompter, which, by the way, if we just turned it around, it'd be easier if we read the teleprompter and he didn't have to struggle through it. But, okay, but he compared himself to Ronald Reagan and the growth of the economy in Ronald Reagan. Of course, Trump had it, the fastest, most incredible growth in the economy that we've seen in 70 years.
But let's be real. I mean, whether it's the Trump economy or the Biden economy, that's so ridiculous to talk about, because what happened is that we went through this incredible economic
free
dislocation.
No, an economic free fall.
Right. And we rushed through this vaccination, which seems to be working. It's got people feeling good again about going out. And naturally, if the economy shrunk so far and all these people were let go, and now you have, this surge going on, because people are feeling good, naturally the economy is increasing, and there's a lot more people getting back to work. I mean, it would have happened
anyway.
I mean, that train had sailed, that train had left the station, that ship had sailed, and the economy and the rebounding economy was going to happen. Now, what we don't know is what happens with the Biden tax increases, and then what happens with the economy. And the other thing too is with all of the quantitative easing, the money that was printed and put into the economy, it had to go somewhere. And where's it going? I mean, it's people are buying things. They're buying things like crazy. People are buying real estate. They're buying stocks. There's just not enough stocks to go around. So therefore, the stock market is going through the roof. I mean, when you put that much money in the economy, obviously, it's going to find its way, to go to work. And that's what's happening.
Well, that's exactly right. And Liz Peek, earlier this week on Fox, did say, and her feeling was, economic recovery, the current economic recovery, has absolutely nothing to do with Biden policies. It's a continuation of where we were before he got into office. Just be clear on that. Because
it's got to do with the pent-up demand that happened because of this downturn and people locked at homes.
Right.
They didn't go out. They weren't spending money. They weren't buying anything.
And they have the money to do something.
And all that free
money. Fill in the empty black box.
Then all that free money was given. Mm-hmm. And that free money is still being given.
And there's billions of dollars on the sidelines waiting to be spent.
Right.
There it is.
And can you spell inflation? Because, what's with what's going on with real estate, what's going on with freight, what's going on with supply chains,
energy,
the everything is getting so much more expensive.
Birthday cakes.
We haven't seen the end of that. I mean, this story still has a number of chapters to be written about what happens when you pump this amount of money into the economy and just start giving it away for free. We've never witnessed anything like that before, and we've not seen the impact yet.
One final word, watch out, universal income. Just keep thinking about that, and that's something that you and I are going to be revisiting over the next few weeks. Universal income and a real big push by the Dems and the progressives to get a guaranteed income, a universal income for Americans in this country. You just pay attention to that. That's going to come back to haunt us.
Well, Rich, you always get the last word. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.